Thank you very much. I'm going to talk to you a little bit through carbon in construction. I'm going to start where it's all started for a period of time and then go through the weeds a little bit and the legislation and the landscape and the support there is to actually get through the decarbonisation in the builds. I'm not the best educated person in the company to come and talk to you about this. She wasn't available, so hopefully I'll give this presentation some credibility. That's me. Been around for 25 years, so I started an energy management company when energy was at 2 and 3 pence a unit. Probably a little bit, I had to play the long game there, didn't I? Because it wasn't going to happen at that stage. So yeah, we've been around for a long time. In September 2015, 196 agencies signed up to what was now called the Paris Agreement, and where the agreement was to stay 2% above global warming targets with a notional cap of 1.5. At COP 2028, the language was that we need to do a bit of a stock take because we're not doing enough, it's not moving fast enough, more finance is needed is for tech, and we basically need to do more. As you can see from those trajectories on the slides, the line in black is where we're going at the moment and how fast we're moving, and based on UK models we are way above, and we're just about somewhere insufficient for just above the 3-degree mark at the moment. That's where we're tracking. If you go into the fair trade, which is about developed companies doing a little bit more than less developed companies, we're way off target. So there's an awful lot of work to be done here. So what would we do as an embedded carbon reduction? We heard from Race, a great opportunity chocolate factory, keeping the embedded concrete in there. So we've got options, 5 things. Build nothing, build less, build a little bit smarter than we are, build efficiently, or minimise waste. For those of you that are in the industry, you're probably doing a number of those already, but those are the options that we have before us. So how are we going to get through these? If you do a life cycle cost on any building, you'll know at around 1% at design stage, roughly 30% is in the build, and then post-construction you've got a thick end of 70% for its lifetime operation in cost. If you do similar with the greenhouse gas emissions, you've got a similar ratio. De minimis at design, then you've got your construction phase, which is obviously a high carbon intensity, and then you've got the life cycle of the building. Now this is where my company have our activities, is in the post-construction operation and maintenance of the built environment. That's where we work to actually reduce the carbon cycles that we see. Now I don't know how many people of you know about the World Green Building Council and their the way it's structured. Over on the right hand side, if I go with whole life cycle and embodied, obviously there are two clear distinctions. Not everybody is clear of this, and unfortunately in our industry the terms are used interchangeably, which they're really not. So if you go for whole life cycle carbon, that is where you've got the blue line around the wrap of the activities, and it starts with right at the product stage, where you're getting your raw products from, where you're getting them out the ground, where's it then being transported to be made into something. When it's made into something, where's it going to be transported to actually be built? And this goes into the next phase of the build and use. And then you've got the use stage, then you've got your end of life, and it's far more conversations about decommissioning than I've ever heard at conception stage for new builds. And then you've got the benefits outside of life cycle where you're reusing, recycling, taking some of the carbon back, as we've just heard in a couple of the examples. The whole life cycle includes the operational carbon. That's the operational carbon for keeping that building running and the amount of refits, changes and alterations that our building will go through. The embodied carbon does not include the operational. So that's a simple definition. If you look at these A, B's and C's, these are referred to throughout the carbon planning stages, and we'll talk a little bit more through as we go through this presentation. So there it is in a simple format, where you're getting it from, what you're doing with it, where you're taking it, where you're building it, and then the life cycle of the building. So that for me is quite easy to understand. So how does that work in reality when we're trying to do things in the built environment? How do we actually take a building that has a high carbon density and reduce that density? Now this is, there's plenty of software tools. This is a dashboard from eTool. And basically what you're able to do with the spreadsheets behind this dashboard is when you have a notional scheme, and this one at 1300, kilowatts per meter, kilowatts CO2e per meter squared. When you have that and you want to go down, when you work on the spreadsheets behind this, you can actually build forward what it looks like when you do any interventions, when you're changing materials and putting in new activities. And as you'll see, the codes there is as was notified previously. So you can use all these tools to actually support, and we'll talk about a couple of more tools. You can use these tools to actually support the activities of when you're looking at a facility, what is it we're going to do, why are we going to do it, how are we going to do it, what's the cost, what's the return on the investment, and then you can look at what the outcome will be from a carbon reduction perspective. Where we play in the built environment, CREM for us, which is the Carbon Risk Real Estate Monitor, is aimed at looking at energy efficiency within the facilities that we operate in, because not all buildings are going to be suitable for refit, refurb because of the cost of doing it. So they can become stranded assets. So what we're looking at doing, and this is based on a 1.5 degree global warming target, that we can then put interventions in to save energy across the estate or the portfolio that we're working with and the specific buildings to make sure that they're on a trajectory which matches the client's aspirations, because people are talking about net zero or carbon neutrality, and quite often they don't really know the difference. Again, it's used interchangeably. So what we try to do is unpick that for the client and say, do you want to be net zero or are you going for carbon neutrality? And what is the period of time that you're doing this activity? And it's quite surprising that when sophisticated clients are not quite sure of how they're going to get to the place that they need to be, that you unpick it for them and they suddenly start to appreciate the difficulties that there are in some of their building stock and what they're going to do with it, because when they have portfolios, it's not all grade 1 space. Those of you that work with RICS, the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors, they have a new standard coming out in July 24, which is looking to harmonise a number of the activities and standards that there are. And again, it will go through a new construction, demolition, retrofit, the civil infrastructure, and fit-out projects. So that's coming through, and it's all being tied together because the life cycle stage A, stage B, as we said, those previous activities or sections, it follows it right through for the materials, fabric. When we get into MEP, there's not a lot of information about MEP in the built asset. We have 3 databases at the moment for the built environment, and you've got the carbon database, BECD, the environment and product declaration, which we'll discuss in a second, and then we have the embodied carbon, the ICE database. And they're all different, and they're all gaining information at different times. So none of them are a complete library of the information that we need to do the jobs that we do. When we get into the MEP, that's really light on information. When you're looking for bids, there's 2 environmental products declarations. There's 2 standards. If you're putting a bid forward for some of the construction works that you might be working with, if you are commenting on about the standards that there are and how you are applying them to the bid that you're putting forward, hopefully it will make you achieve more wins because you're actually talking the language of that the client is looking to achieve. There's 2 standards that I'll mention in a second that I clicked onto previously. Now, CIBSE are involved as well, especially with the MEP, because there isn't the declarations on the MEP. You can actually have three standards. You can have a basic calculation for the embodied carbon of a MEP product. So that means you can calculate it from a set of information. You have a mid-level calculation, which is slightly more in depth, or you get the EPD, the Environmental Product Declaration from the manufacturer, and that is a good standard. So this is the level of complexity that you can go through. The MEP assessment criteria, again, CIBSE have laid it out quite neatly for you. So if you're getting into the weeds of this, there is guides to how you're going to do it. And again, you've got the A's, the B's, and the C's, so that it guides you through the process as you're going through. There is also a guide of how to do this. So if your teams are putting together bids, there's a guide. So you follow the step guide, ask the manufacturer for the EPD. If no EPD, They have to fill out a form. If they can fill out a form, you can do calculations. When you've got those calculations, CIBSE are now asking if you could actually send it to them so that they can build their library on the EPD equipment. The assessment criteria, again, it's quite well laid out. Most of you will understand the REBA stages, REBA 1 through to 7. I won't go through all of those, but at stages 2 and 4 is where there's an awful lot of information that is required with regard to whole life cycle carbon assessments. There's the REBA stages, just for those, just to clarify. It goes from strategic definition right through to handover and use. Again, for those of you who don't know, there is Part Z. It's a conceptual document at the moment. We've got Part L. Part Z is coming in. This Part Z is a construction-led initiative because it's trying to reduce the time, complexity, and cost of putting together a whole life cycle assessment as you go through when you're doing your building council submissions. So this is, there isn't a time frame for this at the moment. It's being worked on at the moment, but it will be in conjunction with the RICS policy that I just mentioned previously. So RICS are guiding this coming through, except for, and it won't involve the operational use. That'll still be through Part L, energy efficiency. So you'll understand your BECs and your TECs and how one must not be above the other on your target. So you've then got to bring that through for the upfront embedded carbon activities and then make sure when you submit it that you've got the right documentation for building control. There's a lot of tools on the market to support the activities that we do. You know, you've got Design Builder, IES, Revit, you know, it can go on. There's a number of them that we currently use. And that will be your modelling tools. How that fits into your SBEMs, your national calculation methods, you know, it's all there for us. And then you've got the life cycle analysis. Again, there's the e-tool, Energy Plus, which I think is off the back of Design Builder, One-Click LCA. So all the tools are there, but it's about harmonizing the outputs, because once you choose the software you're going to use, it's best to stick with it and not change horses mid-race, because you've got to make sure the full design team, construction team are using the same language to go through the construction. So what factors control, you know, the whole life cycle carbon assessments? It's the same as any build product. Time, quality, data, complexity of the build, and this data point is the key element for me, because if you're working with good data, you can get everything done. If you're trying to get data from all different sources, this is where your time and resource will be used unwisely, because get as much data up front as you can as you go through these projects. How we do this, Energy and Technical Services, this is the stuff I've been talking about: carbon management 1, 2, scopes 1, 2, and 3, and decarbonisation, net zero forecasting. But we see it as a live project because we're in the built environment. And when we're we start with the energy management, and we reduce energy consumption as soon as we start getting onto a site. We can take them through the energy and carbon projects and what the whole life cycle schemes look like, and give the client the options, because you've got to discuss with them what's their budget, what's their resource, what's their time frame, how are they going to do that. And then, because you know you've got legislative compliance that we've got to stick with, we do that as almost as a soft benefit. So we are able to drive their net zero performance whilst making immediate energy savings and taking their buildings into the smart area, where you can actually track people egress, what lifts they're using, and how they're getting about the buildings, because that all becomes part of the life cycle assessment for us. And that's it from me. Any questions?
Phil, have you got some examples of how you do that in the real world with some of your clients, where you're doing that with, I know you work in some of the supermarkets.
Yeah, we're working with retailers, and
how that works as a working example.
yeah, thanks for that. Working with retailers, putting on, you know, you've seen them now, they're actually putting cabinet doors on. Fantastic. So on the chillers, it's brilliant. However, when you do that, it's not just a one fit for that. You've got to look at the refrigeration pack. So what refrigeration pack have you got? Because if you use the existing refrigeration pack, its duty is reduced significantly, so therefore it's not an efficient machine anymore. So if you're going to change your refrigeration pack, what refrigerant are you going to go to? Are you still going to use a HFC, or are you going to go with CO2? And then if you're doing that, how are you then going to use the waste heat? Are you going to use underfloor heating? Are you then going to have to change the concrete floor and screed to actually facilitate that? What does that do as a life cycle carbon assessment to that whole process? So it's not in one dimension. You've got to look at the whole process and how you take it through it. Because when I was talking to a retailer only today, that they're looking at their energy efficiency through a net zero lens. Energy efficiency is not a driver, it's saving the money every day, and you know, a couple of £1 million a year is saved through energy efficiency, but they're looking at it through a net zero lens. So it brings in all the other activities that I just mentioned there, so that they can actually look at it and say, actually our net zero trajectory is this, and by the way, we've saved a couple of £1 million by doing X, Y, and Z. So that's how we encompass it in with a lot of retailers. And retailers are great because they've got the cash, because you buy your groceries on a Friday and pay them, and they don't pay us contractors till 90 days later. You know? So they're cash rich and they're always trying the stuff, and it's great to work with those guys. However, as you all know, they're tough customers. Absolutely, and it's such a tough conversation. Insofar as what you're saying there, you're working with the sustainability team who are driving the net zero agenda. You might be working with the energy team who are driving the energy. You're working with the technical services team that want the stuff put in. You're working with the building the building team who look after the fabric of the building. And you're trying to work with all of those departments to get the right solution in at the right cost. And then they're all arguing about whose budget is it. Yeah? And they all then have to try to decide, well, who's going to pay what. So it's a really good question, because it's so difficult unless you are sitting right next to the FD or the MD of that organisation and saying, this is what you need and this is why. Because those guys get it and then they'll make it happen. When you talk to different departments and different budgets, it's a really difficult approach. So unfortunately, value engineering is a big thing. I once had a conversation with somebody, it was about 5 years ago, and they just signed off on a retrofit of T8 tubes across a state of 800 stores. And I said, whoa, stop, can we go LED, please? And they said, no, somebody signed off on that. A director has signed off on that. You are not to upset the apple cart. So it goes back to your point about politics. You know, we couldn't go in and do the right thing because a senior director was going to get egg on his face. So that value engineering there, it cost them fortunes. And it is a really tough conversation. But we find that we try to keep working up the food chain to get to the person that can really make a decision, because it is difficult. Yeah, I think so. It's a very apt comment you make, and it is really difficult. The way that we tackle it with larger estates is that we say, look, let's take 1 or 2 stores or sites, let's fit it to 1 or 2, let's run it to death, let's really try and break it, and then see what we can do to make the savings, and then do really close M&T on the consumption reductions and the savings. Put, you know, lux levels in the horizontal, in the vertical, and then reduce it, and then say, right, what are your customers noticing? Have they noticed anything? Go through that whole process with them. And then sometimes you get it through, and still sometimes they'll go, nope, because it's just not going to do it. You know, we've had that conversations about, in sticking with retail, you can see 4 or 5 rows of tills, and they're all lit, and we're going, well, why don't you turn off the tills when there's nobody there? Because it's simple saving, and it demonstrates that you are doing the right thing, because as soon as somebody comes in, a PIR, up it comes. They said, no, we want our customers drawn to the lighted area, because that's when they're leaving, and we want them to come through and go. So it's a case of, you know, they see their footfall and their spend far more optimally than they look at some of the tech that we could actually deploy. But there's a lot of good tech coming in, but there's also some stuff which is iterations of old stuff which isn't potentially as good as it could be. So that's, again, it's a tricky line to walk through. When you're going down that route, make sure that there is some credence behind what's coming in. Because if you're putting it to the customer and it all falls flat on its arse, then you're left holding the baby sometimes.
Brilliant. Thank you, Phil.
No, thank you.
Thank you.